Hi everyone. So this is my quick Find summary. I'm going to be connecting two seminars from the Find series. My talks are over Carson Schraden's from September 2020 and Tim Plettenbrock's from March 2021. Both of them are about mammalian social evolution, but they came at it from pretty different angles, and I think they're kind of interesting to put next to each other. Alright, so here are the two talks. Carson Schraden works on African striped mice in South Africa at this place called the Succulent Karoo Research Station. And his talk basically argues that we've been getting mammalian social evolution kind of wrong for a long time. Tim Plettenbrock runs the Kalahari Meerkat Project, which has been going since 1993, and his talks about how cooperative breeding works in meerkats. What's kind of cool is that they actually disagree in places. Schraden even specifically criticizes one of Plettenbrock's papers in his talk, but when you put them together, I think they end up telling a better story than either one alone. So the big question Schraden is asking is, was the mammalian ancestor actually solitary? Like most of us probably picture this little nocturnal mouse thing running around between dinosaur feet waiting on its turn to evolve into something more social. But Schraden's basically saying, actually, maybe that's wrong. There are these fossils called cynodonts from about 250 million years ago, and paleontologists have found burrow systems with multiple individuals in them, adults and juveniles together, even pairs buried right next to each other. So there's also a marsupial fossil from 60 million years ago that shows the same pattern. So maybe group living isn't this advanced thing that evolved later on, and maybe it's actually been there the whole time. Okay, so to get to Schraden's argument, you kind of need to know this framework he uses. It's from these guys, Kepler and von Schulk, and it says a social system has 4 parts that we should keep separate. Social organization is just who lives with who, structure is how they interact, like dominance and stuff. The care system is who raises the babies, and the mating system is who mates with who. And Schraden makes a pretty big deal about this because people mix these up all the time in papers, like when Lucas and Plettenbrock called a species solitary in their 2013 paper. What they kind of meant was there's one breeding female, but Schraden means that the animals actually live alone. So same word and totally different things. Schraden's main study animal is the African striped mouse. And what he shows is really cool because you get all this variation in the same species. When population density is high, they live in these big groups, up to 30 animals, with one breeding male and like 2 to 4 breeding females and all their offspring. And when density is low, they live alone. And at in-between densities, you actually get both at the same time. It's not even different populations. He showed photos of the same individuals living in a group 1 month and then living solitary the next month when the breeding season started. So same mouse, different lifestyle. Basically, the females leave the group when they're about to give birth because other females in the group will kill their babies if they haven't given birth yet themselves. So it's reproductive competition that's driving them apart, not food or predators, which to me is pretty surprising. Schraden calls this thing IVSO, which is interspecific variation in social organization. And his lab has been building this big database of mammals, and it turns out IVSO is really common. In most mammal groups, more than half of the species they've looked at show multiple types of social organization. And here's the thing, for tons of species, nobody's really watched them carefully. Like out of about 98 possum species, only 8 have actually been studied in the field. Everyone just assumes they're solitary, but when people actually watch galagos and mouse lemurs carefully, it turned out they live in groups and just forage by themselves. So Schraden's basically saying, go study the born species, you'll probably find cool stuff out. Another really interesting point came out of the Q&A. Thane Martinez brought this up. Even animals we call solitary still have social lives. Like pumas recognize their neighbors. If they meet at a kill, related ones are pretty chill with each other, but they'll attack strangers. Kangaroo rats are alone in their burrows, but they're basically communicating all the time with their neighbors. So if a species can be solitary in its social organization, but still have a pretty complex social structure, solitary does not mean asocial. And this is actually a pretty good setup for Plettenbrock, because even if solitary animals are already doing social stuff, you kind of have to ask what group living actually adds. So now we'll jump over to Plettenbrock, who works on meerkats. He started the Kalahari Meerkat Project in '93, and he's been running it ever since, which is pretty cool. Meerkats are really good study animals because they get used to people super quickly. They'll literally climb up on a scale to get a crumb of a hard-boiled egg. And apparently that's the secret to getting good data out of meerkats. So he has data on basically every individual. He's weighed several times a week across their whole life. It's a lot of data compared to most field studies, and it means he can actually run experiments on wild animals, which is really hard to do in most systems. You can't change the ratio of helpers to pups in a group, or he can change the ratio of helpers to pups in a group and then see what happens. So it's a really powerful and strong data set. So Platenbrock distinguishes between singular breeders and plural breeders. And singular breeders like meerkats, one female does all the reproducing in the group. The subordinate females are physiologically suppressed. They have lower hormone levels and way fewer pregnancies. The dominant kicks out any subordinate who tries to breed around age 5, and she'll even kill their pups if they manage to have any, which is metal. One of the kind of crazy things Platenbrock said is that she's often killing her own grandchildren, which is dark, but it makes sense because her own offspring are more closely related to her than her grandchildren are. She can produce like 80 or so surviving babies in her lifetime, which is a lot of freaking babies. So there used to be this question about whether helpers actually help or if they're just there, and the correlational data was kind of unclear, but Platenbrock did this pretty clever experiment where he moved pups between groups briefly to change helper to pup ratio. And what he found is the pups in groups with more helpers gained more weight and survived better. So helping, it was established that it's real. Helpers feed pups and babysit and do sentinel duty and dig burrows. And I found it interesting that helping is conditional. If you feed a helper, they help more. If they're starving, they help less. So it's not just mindless drone helping like I would expect in insects. The obvious question is, why don't subordinates just leave and breed on their own? And basically they can't. Territories are super rare in the Kalahari, and if you leave alone, you usually just die. Even if you leave as a splinter group with a few others, you usually can't take on an established group. So basically everyone queues up, and about a quarter of meerkats die every year. So if you wait long enough, your mom might die, and then your oldest subordinate takes over. Meanwhile, helping your mom raise her siblings actually gets you inclusive fitness, because under genetic monogamy, your siblings are related to you, or as related to you as your own kids would be. And this is called the monogamy hypothesis. Platenbrock showed this really clear pattern that cooperative breeders like mongooses and canids and marmosets and mole rats all have really high relatedness within their groups. And regular social species like baboons have much lower relatedness. So kinship is a big part of why the system works. And there's actually this really interesting counterexample, which is banded mongooses, and their groups got bigger over evolutionary time. Relatedness dropped, and the whole suppression system just broke down. Now all the females breed, so it looks like you need high kinship to maintain the singular breeding. Where I think the two talks really connect is when Schraden says maybe solitary living is actually derived, not ancestral, and then Platenbrock shows how sociality can go all the way to cooperative breeding when kinship is high and conditions are harsh. Both of them are basically saying you can't tell a simple linear story of mammalian social evolution where things just get more social over time. It's more complicated than that, and both of them emphasize that social organization is really flexible and depends on ecology. And in both Q&As, both speakers push back on the popular idea that cooperative breeders are super smart. Thornton has done work showing they're actually not that smart, and Platenbrock literally said that meerkats are specialists who are good at one thing and otherwise pretty dumb. And one other thing that came out of both talks is that definitions really matter. Like, Schraden spent a bunch of time on how different people use words like solitary and monogamous to mean completely different things, which is kind of a problem if you're trying to do a big comparative study. So the take-home theme is basically, before you use any database, you should check what it actually means in their own terms. 3 takeaways. First, mammalian sociality is way more variable than we usually think. IVSO, the interspecific variation, is really common, and we've been missing a lot of it. Second, cooperative breeding is a special thing that just happens under special circumstances and conditions. And third, we need a lot more field work, especially in less charismatic species, like both speakers really emphasized. The message is basically don't study the cute primates, study the boring mouse too. Yeah, that's my speech. Thank you.